Hey everyone, Doc Allie here. It's been a minute. Let's catch up with my 12-week summary of this internal medicine rotation. No, but really, it's been a minute. And I apologize for that, guys. But honestly, internal medicine and my experience with family medicine are like two completely different worlds. And at first, I was coping with it well. The stress was low and everything was okay. But then the internal medicine shelf date kept creeping and creeping and creeping. And then my stress levels kept going up and up. And I don't know if you guys know, but content creating is actually a lot of work. Editing's a lot of work. So not to put you guys on the back burner, but I had to put you guys on the back burner for the betterment of myself and my scores and my ability to do well on my upcoming exam. But I'm here before I actually take it in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And I'm gonna tell you guys about everything I've learned in the past 12 weeks. So internal medicine has been 12 weeks of learning new study patterns, new scheduling skills, time management. It's been a lot, but here is the shocking news is that I never thought that internal medicine would be a path of interest, and actually my time, even though these 12 weeks have been daunting, my time has actually led and opened a new pathway of interest. As I was telling you guys with my family medicine rotation, my interest started to grow towards geriatrics. But in the same aspect or same breath, I didn't want to just be dealing with like outpatient geriatrics. So with internal medicine, you get a wide range of patients, but as we know, the aged population is the majority of the population now. So I actually had a lot of geriatric patients in my time in these hospitals, and I love them so much. So you get the wide range of cases. You get the infectious, you get the COPD exacerbations, you get the kidney failure, you get the C. diff. My gosh, if you know about C. diff, you know about C. diff. I've had GI bleeds. I've had literally everything. And I think that's what makes internal medicine so exciting is you can have maybe 10 or 15 patients within the day. And each of them will be presenting sometimes with similar things. Maybe you'll have 3 or 4 patients with COPD exacerbations, 2 with GI bleeds, 2 with now acute on chronic kidney failure. But it's just interesting because you don't only see that one thing. So that's what I've really loved about internal medicine. Like, when you answer your questions and the questions gives you a case about a patient and then you put everything together to try to come to the conclusion of the answer, right? But this is like real life. You now have this patient and you have to figure out what's going wrong. And even if a previous doctor, specialist, nurse has seen this patient, you still have to go in and make sure that that's the correct diagnosis. Because I've had this happen, and I'm thankful that I've had this experience because it helped me also with my attending telling me that you are going to be the primary provider. So you cannot be the person that says, this is what they said, so I'm gonna just go with it. I had a patient who supposedly had NSTEMI, and they actually didn't have NSTEMI. It was just unstable angina, but because the patient or the previous department wasn't actually looking at the fact that it was troponin sensitivity and not troponin like in general. So it's a lot. And I think the biggest takeaways, I'm going to give you 2 very good examples of why you have to do your part and you have to be the main provider. So I went in with one patient. One patient had congestive heart failure. They had chronic kidney disease. They had COPD. I can't even recall what actually brought him in because I remember when they first brought him in. But then I'm reading through his notes and all the specialists are checking off on him. Like, he's okay, he's doing fine, he's progressing. And then I look at the labs and I'm like, because they're specialists, And so I'm like, am I tripping? Am I reading too far into it? Because as students, as medical students, if like the glucose is above 100, we automatically are like, do they have diabetes? And it's like, no, they're just in a stress state. It's okay. So that was why I was kind of concerned to be like, okay, am I actually seeing these labs as, elevated and crazy, or is it just me being a medical school student? And so I went into his room and I was like, I'm gonna do a cardiac exam, I'm gonna do a respiratory exam, because that's the main things we're worried about right now. Of course, I'll talk to him, I'll talk to his wife. By talking to his wife, by talking to him, I realized, okay, I'm gonna have to do a neurology exam. He was alert and oriented ×1. He had asterixis. He was not who he was, according to the wife. And so I remembered looking at those labs, his kidneys were actually doing worse than baseline. And so I came back to my attending and I told him, I think the patient has uremic encephalopathy. My attending, of course, has to go in and make sure for himself, because as I'm saying, you are the main provider. You have to figure it out on your own. And he was like, yeah, I think so. And so if we had only listened to the specialist, only looked at their notes, didn't take the time to talk to the wife, take the time to actually do like a good physical exam on the patient, like, who knows what could have happened to him, We had to do emergency dialysis. Patient who, he had congestive heart failure, but it was like a new diagnosis for him. He had lived his whole life healthy and fine and didn't care about anything, I went and talked to him first day. I maybe got stuck in his room for 20 minutes because he was giving me life lessons. Again, I love my geriatric population. But then second day, I go to check in on him. He's not as talkative, and he tells me he's not doing that well. But the nurse is in the room, and the nurse is like, oh, he's fine. Because when he told me I'm not doing so good, I'm like, oh, what's going on? What's wrong? My concern is high, because if someone tells me they're not doing good, then obviously I should care, right? But the nurse is like, oh, yeah, no, he's fine. He just moved over from his bed to his chair. He's fine. I'm like, okay. I talked to him for a few more minutes. She was like doing something with him, so I don't even think that I was able to do a physical exam. More people kept coming in, so it was just a mess. So I told him, I have to go see the other patients. I have to go to a meeting. I'll be back. Not even 10 minutes after the meeting, my attending gets a phone call that his patient is in critical care and he has to come down to the ED urgently. That was my patient, who actually was suffering from some pulmonary edema. But because I listened to my nurse, I didn't mention it urgently during the MDRs, and therefore my patient could have almost lost his life. So the moral of the story is, be a good provider. You have to figure these things out on your own. You're not going to be given everything, all the information that you actually need in order to always diagnose your patients. You'll be given false information, you'll get false histories, false review of systems, false physical exams. Like, you really just have to be a good provider and do all of that on your own. Double check, make sure, triple check if you have to, because this is a patient's life on the line, and nothing's scarier than thinking that you could be responsible for why someone ends up dying, and it was preventable. So I had about 7 to 8 different attendings, and each of them had us doing different things. Mainly it was, hey, I want you to see this patient. Maybe I would follow that patient for the entire week. Or then I could go to another attending and I would have a new patient every day, and sometimes I could just do little checkups on my previous patient if I want to. Juggling multiple patients is hard, especially trying to keep their labs together, if you ask me, but it's a learning process, obviously, if I'm going to go into this field. But my main thing is, you just have to see what each attending is expecting out of you, because one attending might just want it nicely summarized, just tell me the main reasons why that person's here. The other attending is going to want to know their white blood cell count, their hemoglobin, their, everything. So you have to ask or see with each attending what they want. I transitioned quickly from carrying a notepad to carrying my iPad, because it's easier. If I did want to just type up a quick note that day, I could just type it up and then access it from Google Drive. Or if I did want to write it out, then I could write it out. So that's mainly abrupt change that happened from the last time I talked to you guys about internal medicine. So studying has definitely been a struggle because, as you always know, in medical school there's not enough hours in the day. I'm also maybe increasing my resources because I don't know why someone came to the conclusion that after basic sciences I don't want to see things anymore. A lot of current resources are more so focused on, let me give you a practice question or a practice case scenario and then you solve it, or let me give you high yield information to look for. And all of that is helpful in its own aspect, but I am a visual learner, so I still like my visual videos. And so I have returned to Sketchy. There is a clinical aspect of Sketchy, and so I have returned to that so I could get visual help with remembering high yield information. And then, as I told you guys last video, I have actually moved into using Anki. I try to complete the goal for every day. It's definitely also helped a lot with retaining information, retaining key things. Like, I'll do maybe a flashcard before I do some practice questions, and then that would actually be the practice question. Like, I would know it just from the flashcard. I have created my own flashcards on top of a deck that I was given. It's like a general medical school student deck. I can see if I can share the drive link in case you guys want access to it. I still read, so I use my Step Up to Medicine book. I use Divine Interventions notes. I haven't really been watching the videos as much anymore because I'm trying to do things timely. I think that's it. And then I do make my own notes. Do you guys want to see some of my notes? I'll show you some of my drawings and everything. So here you guys go. Like I said, I like to see things. I'm a visual learner, so I have been drawing on top of everything. Things that I continue to miss or mistake or questions I may have, I have been drawing and getting pictures so that I can get this information down before the exam. So more insight into the day-to-day of my internal medicine rotation is I would wake up in the morning. As I told you guys before, I used to have time to, study. I don't really have time to study before my rotations anymore because my hours are now back up at 7 and 8. So I just get up and I go. However, with some attendings, I actually have to chart review. That's what I was talking about when I was reading the specialist notes and I was confused because the labs were saying something else. So chart review, make sure you're doing that well, making sure that you're looking at all of the vitals, tracking them, trending them, especially if the patient's been there for a few days, looking through labs, looking for abnormalities. And as a med student, we see one thing wrong and we go crazy, but you have to actually, and I guess you learn this more with your attendings, is know the actual clinical significance. So if a diabetic patient is like at 200, they're not really concerned. If a patient starts off at 200 and they're in there because they're sick or distressed and they haven't had their insulin medication, like, you have to take all of this into consideration. Looking at imaging, looking at blood cultures, looking at all of those good things, that's how you get a solid chart review. I basically would write up a patient note based off of my chart reviewing so that when I did present to my attendings, I had a good idea of what I was talking about, past medical history and all of that. And then before I present to my attending, I would of course go see the patient, and then that's how you can make adjustments to the incorrect information you might have received from a previous note or how they're feeling the day of. I always update the review of systems to how they're feeling the day of. And of course, the physical exam needs to be updated to that day. And yeah, on top of chart reviewing, I've also had to write actual patient notes for the doctor. I've learned their desire for assessment and plan. They always say that it's your style and it's whatever you choose to do. So cheers to 12 weeks, guys. It's been fun. I'm actually, even though I've enjoyed it, it's time to move on. I will be happy to get this shelf out of the way, and I will be happy to move on to the next rotation. And until then, I will talk to you guys soon.